Okay, so I think we're good to go. Okay, so welcome to this session. So this session is number 2BD. So if you can all fill out your session feedback, if you end up dropping before the end and I can't remind you all before that, it's 2BD. So we're going to be talking about IBM Z batch products as a service, and we've got a great team of people talking to us today. So we've got Vince, Bill, Alan, Jeannie, and Tom, all from, I've just completely forgotten where you're from. You're from Virtual Z Computing, right?
Yes.
Yes. Completely forgot what we had there. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand over to these guys. And if anyone has any questions throughout, can you please pop them in the chat box and we'll go through them as we go. Okay, thank you. Over to you guys.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Tom Niermeyer and I will be moderating our session today. We'll be talking about modernizing your mainframe through virtualization with a focus on batch products as a service. Just as a reminder, this session will be recorded and will be made available at the end of the conference. We'd like to make this as much interactive as possible. If you do have chats, or if you'd, I guess that's the only way to communicate is through chat. We'll be happy to answer them as we go. Looks like we have a gaining crowd here. So please put your questions in chat. But let me start with just a question. So tell me if this sounds familiar. The needs of the business and rate of change has never probably been greater. And at the same time, you're probably being asked to do more with less, and likely with a budget that at best is flat. Over the last several years, you've considered probably a dozen or so solutions that would drive down costs from IBM. Many of ISVs have contributed to that. You know, if you think back over the last 10 or so years, IBM has come up with some great innovation with zips and their specialty engines as a way to drive down costs. They've come out with creative pricing with the rolling 4-hour average a half dozen years or so ago, and more recently, tailor fit pricing. The ISVs have also innovated. You look at BMC as an example. They've innovated and introduced an entire family of products designed to lower your rolling 4-hour average. And more recently, their AMI, their automated mainframe intelligence products, all designed to drive down costs. CA Broadcom, another great example. They've been incredibly forward-thinking and progressive in their staffing and services offerings. They've introduced free education and have actively recruiting new mainframe talent out there. But even with all this information, you are still being asked to reduce cost, optimize mainframe environments, and consider alternative solutions. So really, business as usual doesn't seem to be an option these days, which is why we're so excited to talk to you today. We believe there is another source of optimization and modernization that would drive down costs and improve overall efficiency with your mainframe resources by leveraging Virtual Z technology. So think of Virtual Z as an enabling technology for what's possible in batch workload redirection and resource optimization. With me today is an esteemed group, a very handsome group of leaders and speakers. I'd like to go through these real quick. I'll start with Jeannie. Jeannie is founder and CEO of Virtual Z Computing. Jeannie has had decades of experience at CA and executive levels, and started Virtual Z 2 years ago. Vince Ray is also with us. Vince is the Chief Technology Officer and creator of Virtual Z software. Vince is also the author of CA Top Secret, a patented mainframe innovator, and a recognized expert in the mainframe software development. Alan Bain is with us. Alan is a leader in software asset management, helping customers negotiate their software licenses and saving them millions of dollars. ISAM's benchmarking database contains over 100 million software costs, product usage, and categorization data points from over 800 software vendors, across 1,000 data centers worldwide. And finally, Bill Everingham is with us, and Bill has been supporting the IBM mainframe since the mid-90s. Most recently, he has been involved with clients working on how to make their most of their mainframe journey into cloud. Move on to the next slide. So before I hand this over to the people that will be really talking about this, I wanted to provide you with what I would call an executive summary of what you'll be hearing today. Virtual Z can help users transition to WAS, workload as a service, by partnering with, and the key word here is with, by partnering with service providers and ISVs. Virtual Z can also help consolidate licensing for redundant and oversubscribed licensing. They can optimize resources with an objective of only paying for what you need. Virtual Z can also provide optionality when considering your cloud strategy. And finally, more of a tactical offering that I would refer to as defensive licensing that allows you to isolate workloads for penalty box environments or in an effort to replace competitive offerings. So with that said, I'd like to turn it over to Jeannie to take it from here.
Great, thank you, Tom. So today, for the remainder of this tech talk, we're going to cover, how some of those things might happen in your organization using virtualization technology and automated techniques as opposed to manual techniques. And one example of that might be, we just spoke to a customer, in fact, yesterday, who about 6 or 7 years ago started an effort to quarantine or put certain products in a penalty box, which takes years and years of work to do that for a certain set of products. If they wanted to do that for more products today, they'd also have to invest that type of time, money, effort, and then retrain all of their users where to go find products that have been set aside in a certain LPAR for access, and kind of creates a bit of operational inefficiency into the business forevermore by taking those steps manually. With the type of technology that Tom was talking about, and that we'll get into here in a minute, you can get to that same end result within just a few hours with virtualization technology and mainframe software today. So there's been a lot of innovation in mainframe modernization and optimization, and certainly software as a service, virtualization, automating manual processes is one of the benefits that are available today. In this scenario, you can virtualize mainframe software products on premise. So today, like the organization we talked to yesterday before their quarantining effort, you have all of your products installed on all of your mainframes. So you're maintaining them multiple times, you're upgrading them multiple times, you're likely paying for them multiple times. With virtualization technology, you can narrow products down to one subsystem or LPAR and virtualize them across the environment. So on the left-hand side, if yesterday a programmer was submitting, for example, a compile to CPU1, on the right-hand side, after implementing virtualization techniques and software, they would still submit their compile to CPU1. They wouldn't know that it's being redirected, in this case, to CPU3, where the compiler sits, executing there, and the output being returned back to CPU1. So this work is done in a way that's completely invisible to end users. The only people who would know this software has been implemented and these products have been virtualized are the people who actually implement it and get it set up, which again can be done in hours, not in days. The other alternative is mainframe software as a service. So we know that a lot of customers are looking to cloud, and many have gone to cloud providers or outsourcers. And they're starting to ask these providers, why am I licensing my hardware as a service, but I'm not licensing my software as a service? Well, you can start licensing your software as a service today. So rather than cloud computing in the mainframe continuing to mean picking up your entire mainframe, hardware, software alike, and transporting it to another data center. We're talking about actually moving individual products into a public or private mainframe cloud and hosting them to your users, either outsourced to a third party and licensed as a service, so you don't need to keep the product or the license on premise anymore, and you achieve all the benefits of cloud computing, or in your own internal private mainframe cloud where you host products to your users in a SaaS model effectively in your private data center. The types of products that are eligible for this type of virtualization today tend to be more batch-oriented products that are less data intensive. That's not a limitation of virtualization, it's just a limitation of network capacity and the realities there. But certainly if you had other methods to share data, for example, shared DASD, you would have more flexibility in the types of products that you virtualize. So there's quite a few products that you can start licensing as a service today, with more to come. With that, I'll turn it over to Bill to talk about how you might bring this to a reality in your organizations.
Well, thank you, Jeannie. I thought that was a really excellent way of describing where the world has been and what it can be. So as we look at effectively the mainframe cloud environment, building on what Jeannie was saying, there are a large number of products that have been individually licensed and provided exclusively to organizations. Now with the technologies we're talking about, it's really optimizing what clients spend. Now you can see here, which is very much a subset of the slide that Jeannie had before, the virtualization software is effectively taking all of those products and putting them into a SaaS model. What that effectively means for organizations that certainly I've been talking to this year is that the plethora of licenses that they've got and the softwares that they're using can now be actually virtualized, taken away from the what LPAR are we using it on and which mainframe are we using it on, and saying, right, okay, I have that product. Do I care where it sits? No. Do I need access to it? Yes. So when you look at the model that you've got in the center there, you can see that pretty much all of those product sets are available for clients to use. But there's a word of caution that I'd like to put out here. And I know I'm going to be passing over to Alan in just a few short minutes. Some of the things that really need to be taken into consideration is it's all very well for us to talk about optimization, virtualization, etc. But from recent experience, and certainly on two very large engagements recently, actually who owns the license? When you've automated, when you've moved to potentially another cloud provider in the past, where have those licenses and the ownerships of those licenses gone? Now, I know I'm talking to a primarily technical audience, but these are the sort of considerations that really need to be taken into account when you're looking at your own environment. Ask some of the pertinent questions as to, you know, where is the ownership? Who's actually paying for it? Now, once you've established those baselines, then you can start having the meaningful conversations that really start talking about both software optimization and to a large extent MIPS optimization, which of course is where virtualization is trying to drive the amount of usage down. Now, whilst we can talk very knowledgeably about that, Alan Bain over at ISAM has been doing software licensing for, I was going to say decades, Alan, but I'll be generous and say just for a few years. He's still a young man. The bottom line here is everything that we talk about and we believe is possible comes about from having a really close relationship outside of the technical workplace into other parts of the business, and certainly into your licensing specialists, whether that's in procurement or in vendor management. So everything we talk about, let's have a think about the wider picture. Alan, what does that actually mean in terms of, yeah, okay, now I know what I own, what am I going to do about it? Where does that fit?
Sure, absolutely, Bill. I appreciate the great introduction. And Jeannie, if you want to move forward, there you go. So, one of the things you said was optimizing what clients spend, and that's exactly what I've been working on and what we have been doing. Mainframe software asset management, and as Bill said, I've been doing this for decades, literally. has been around long before our industry even started calling it software asset management. And it was really a matter of reviewing licenses against where they're entitled, the licenses you own against where they're deployed, and then reducing licenses to necessarily save money. And then, of course, negotiating contracts that are going to be both flexible and conducive to lowering costs. And so that's really what this is all about. As Bill mentioned, obviously this is a highly technical audience, but I started this as well when I was in the technical fields and thinking in terms of how can I reduce my costs so that I can necessarily grow my mainframe, or that I can use that money in other places for other purposes. So our goal really is to, and your goal I think should be, and this is more of a, gosh, what can you do? Start by reviewing software license agreements, taking a look at your mainframe capacity and the usage data. So really understanding what products are being used, and then understanding those license agreements. You don't need to understand all of the terms and conditions and insurance and all of that kind of stuff, makes my head go crazy. But thinking in terms of flexibility of software placement, as well as ability to reduce license counts. So those things should be, part and parcel of any contract, any license agreement that you have. So you want to review that against your mainframe capacity and, of course, what products are actually being used. Once you establish that inventory, and very likely you have an inventory in a spreadsheet somewhere that you're using for even looking at software placement and where products are being run and what products are being used by who, what business areas, those kind of things. So review that inventory then against what Jeannie had put up against products that are conducive to virtualization, products that are conducive to this idea of software as a service. So you want to review that, your inventory against that list of products. And then understand, based on how much you're paying for those products, savings estimates. And we like to use a 30% range, if you will, of potential savings. And then work that against the time to complete and the cost to complete, if you will, and then use that to help prioritize your effort. And then once you've done that and start to think in terms of software as a service, really upon contract renewal, you want to negotiate the most advantageous pricing options. Make sure that you can actually cancel products mid-contract if you need to, that you can move products mid-contract if you need to. Those are all the things that are going to help you in this kind of software as a service world, virtual world, to reduce your spend and reduce your cost. And of course, if this seems daunting, we will certainly help you and guide you in this effort to make sure that you can identify as much potential savings as possible. Jeannie, I think we're back to Vince now.
Thank you, Alan. Yes, Vince Ray will talk about how virtualization technology works in your environment.
All right. Well, thanks, Jeannie. And generally, when we talk about virtualization, what we really mean is redirecting a product execution from its original source, in other words, where the user thinks the product is, to somewhere else. And that somewhere else can be, as Jeannie outlined earlier, it can be an on-prem, another LPAR in your data center. It could be to a cloud service provider. It could be, really to another data center on the other side of the planet, if that's what you're trying to do. So to kind of drive home how that might work, I wanted to just step through one example that shows all of the different pieces and explains how how it all works together to give you that result. So, we're going to look at a sample here that's a very traditional COBOL compile running in batch, submitted by a user someplace in your environment. Now, it wouldn't be virtualization if we required the user to change the way he does things. I mean, that's the problem that Jeannie pointed out before. If you manually set up, I don't know, penalty boxes or, some smaller environment for this work to run, your user is generally going to be aware of that. He's going to have to submit his work a certain way so that it runs where you want it to run. He's going to have his data on the system where that, in this case, where the COBOL compiler is installed. We think there's a different way where the user just submits what he's always submitted, completely unchanged, no impact at all to the user. And when the virtualization software sees this on the source computer, it looks at the policies that have been set up and it recognizes, oh, you're trying to run a COBOL compiler and that's not installed here, that's installed somewhere else. And it'll communicate across the network to whatever target system is involved. And again, that could be a cloud provider, that could be another LPAR in your data center, or really anything in between. Now, when we get to the target system, there's a couple of challenges. One is that, especially in that case where you're going to the service provider, the cloud system might not be configured exactly the same as the source. It might be different version of zOS. It might be different security policies. It might be, whatever about it might be different. So it's important when that work gets to the target that there be a very simple way to tailor it. In other words, while at one extreme you could submit exactly what the user intended, you can also edit what he intended so that it fits properly on the target system. Once that's done, it's really just a matter of executing, in this case, the COBOL compiler, the work that was originally intended. And of course, it's not just about getting the execution moved to a different system. It's that when, in this example, when the compiler opens a file that it expects to contain source code, that it's going to actually have the correct source code shipped to it. So that again, there are many options in a if you're redirecting on-prem, that might be a shared DASD model where the compiler just references the same data sets, but from a different system. In the cloud, that might be more complex because the cloud provider is not going to have your data. So in that case, the virtualization software has to make the data available to the cloud environment. But anyway, all of that handled seamlessly and transparently means that you can execute the same unit of work on the target that you would have without this software in the system, and the user has no idea that this is even taken place. The final step is really that the any results that redirected application has generated has to get back to the original user, the original source system. So in our COBOL compile example here, that might include the program listings and various sysout files. That might include things like the object code that was generated by the compiler. When that program completes, the user needs that to all be back on the source system exactly where it would normally be if this virtualization hadn't taken place. So all of that's handled by the virtualization software. And this is pretty much the cycle. And it's the same cycle whether we look, I talked about the COBOL compiler, but it could be anything. It could be, reporting tool like Broadcom's EasyTreeve. It could be, pretty much anything that fits this model of batch processing. Jeannie made the comment before, the best sweet spot are things that aren't necessarily data intensive. Well, that really is just a function of how much bandwidth exists between these systems. And and honestly, what your acceptance of any kind of network delay there is. So many sites will say, I'm fine with it taking a little bit longer if I save a significant amount of money in the process. These are batch jobs generally, so few extra seconds in that cycle tends not to be too visible to the end user. So Jeannie, why don't we go to the next slide? And and this is really just the summary. Really, the key takeaways are things like, there's no change, no JCL, no source code changes, no anything from the perspective of the user submitting the work. He just keeps right on doing what he's always done, and really no impact to him. As Jeannie said, if you didn't tell him that this went on, he would probably have no way to know that that we redirected the work as I described. The rest of this, I mean, a lot of it is focused around the need to deploy in a flexible, easy way. I mean, it's not much good to implement something that takes massive amount of labor to implement. So again, the virtualization software needs to be the type of thing, download it, start it up, set up some policies, and it's done. It also needs to be flexible enough to change with time. So you may be in the kind of environment where there's not a lot of use of a particular product that you virtualize most of the year. Maybe you go to a cloud provider with that. But for that month or two where, I don't know, maybe your usage is very heavy, or the requirements change a little bit, you can completely reconfigure and say, you know what, now I want to run that on-prem, or whatever the combinations are. That ability to change, to adapt to your needs based on where the least expensive place to run the software is really important. So I won't spend a lot of time on the rest of these, but it's all in that same idea of being easy to deploy, being flexible enough so that as your needs change, you can accommodate that very, very easily. And and that's the goal here. Make it simple to get to a virtualized environment so you can take advantage of some of the cost savings opportunities that are possible.
Okay.
Jeannie, back to you, or Tom, back to you.
Yeah. Okay. So, let's just recognize where we are. We're in a virtual event, and we know there might be some questions out there. So before I wrap up, if there's something you would like us to answer, please send us a quick note in the chat box, and we'll try and address that before we wrap up today. But let me just kind of talk about our next actions, or next possible actions. There's really a couple things that we could look at, maybe just different on-ramps for you guys to consider. One is just researching the technology out there. If there's a lot of information on the Virtual Z website, which you'll see. We could clearly get on a call to talk about your situation in more detail, which might mean that we need to bring in Bill or Alan or all of us, just depending on size and scope. So clearly open to a discovery call if that's the route you'd like to take. And we also have some just utilities that might help, if nothing else, turn on the lights as to whether you might have a potential candidate for virtualizing your workload. We call it a cost savings assessor, and basically it does just that. It helps you identify low-hanging fruit that might be worthy of the Virtual Z technology and moving to a more virtualized environment. So one part is just research. If you'd like to do that, there's plenty of information out there, and there's plenty of information with ISAM as well as Blue Sky. I'm getting Bill, your organization, the name escaped me right now, but
It's just up here behind me, blue chip, Tom.
Blue chip. Okay, there we go. I know I would screw this thing up. So so we be happy to jump on a call and talk through that. The other thing, the product works, and we're not opposed to having you guys kick the tires. We'd like to talk you through it a little bit. And frankly, we believe there are multiple options and multiple opportunities to save money. And not every situation may be the same, right? So there may be different use cases within your environment that you might want to test out. We provided a couple up front, but there could be other scenarios that we could talk through. But yeah, we'd love for you guys to try the product and kick it and test it. And we're not afraid to put that in use. So that's an open offer. And that could be within your environment or with a service provider. And depending on how you'd like to scope this and where you think the end goal would be, we can clearly talk about that. So that's all we had. I'm going to check the chat one more time. Maybe I'll check the chat one more time. And also, let me just go around the room. Final comments or thoughts from any of the speakers before we wrap up?
I've actually got a question, if you don't mind, Tom. I'm going to be part of the audience for the next couple of minutes.
Perfect.
As I look at this, I'm bought into this. I totally see its value, but there are some thoughts in the back of my head. The mainframe world as a whole is suffering with I won't say a resource shortage, but certainly the resources that are available are getting older, and there's an awful lot of we've always done it this way type of thing. If I was looking to trial this product on premise, what sort of support could I expect from Virtual Z to make it a success and prove that I'd spend my time wisely? How do I do that?
Jeannie, why don't you take a cut at that one?
Yeah, I can. Thank you for the question, Bill. So Virtual Z is fairly straightforward, as Vince said, to deploy. It's possible that organizations with a skilled team could by far and large follow our documentation and implement Virtual Z. But certainly we're available as needed to help organizations first prepare for their installation, conduct their installation side by side, and then support the customer afterwards. But we do have, a pretty easy to use guide with fairly easy to install software where most organizations will have a pretty smooth experience from beginning to end, and may need a little bit of help here and there, but I wouldn't imagine a lot of help would be required. And then the other thing I would say is Mark Wilson with BMC Mainframe Services, and everybody on this call, of course, knows Mark Wilson is one of our references, having installed Virtual Z in their lab and tested it. And he speaks for us at conferences from time to time and on other webinars. And his experience was that this software is absolutely set and forget. So once you're up and running, you really can. In fact, he tells kind of a funny story about, in fact, they forgot that it was installed in their data center because it really does just run once it's there. Bill, did that address your question?
It most certainly does. And Jeannie, I'm glad you pulled this slide up, because this is sort of a balance between yourself and possibly Vince. When we're talking about zOS and supporting from 2.1 upwards, of course, nowadays IBM is only supporting N-1, so 2.1, 2.2 are now completely no longer supported. Are there any worries for people who are running, say, a 2.2 environment? And I can certainly think of 2 or 3 of my clients who are in that space, that if they do this, that all of a sudden they're going to have to start calling IBM in at significant amounts of money to, don't get me wrong, I love them, but at lots of money to dig them out of a problem that they've inadvertently created. Is it genuinely risk-free?
Vince, I'll defer to you on that question.
Yeah, Bill, so we don't, I mean, if the customer is running on an older version of zOS that's not supported by IBM, I don't think we add any new risk to that. Our software runs there perfectly fine, and in the big scheme of things, what we install there is a pretty small package. You know, if I were that customer, though, I'd be worried about, you know, as you well know, what happens if I bump into you know, a zOS issue that has nothing to do with the virtualization software or any of that, but you know, how am I going to get it fixed? And yeah, and certainly there are plenty of sites who live with that. But you know, again, I don't think we change that one way or the other, honestly.
Thank you, Vince.
Yep.
Question, Bill? Okay, any final thoughts or comments before we wrap? All right, well, thank you very much for attending. We appreciate your time, and we would love to hear from you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Thank you.
Tom.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank
Thanks,
you very
guys.
much. And I'll close the call now, and the session was 2BD if you can all give session feedback. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.